If you feel exhausted or even scared to talk about what's happening between Israelis and Palestinians at all, you're not the only one. This conflict has a way of pulling the world back in. Every few years, we look up and it's on our screens again. New footage, new headlines, new heartbreak, and the same old questions. How did things get this bad? Why does every new chapter feel worse than the last? In this episode, we're going to stay with those questions, not to pick a side, but to give you a calmer, clearer way to look at Israel and Palestine and a few tools you can actually use the next time this story explodes online. People around the world, people with no family in the region, no political stake, no personal history, still feel something tighten in their chest every time the story returns. Exhaustion, confusion, fear, heartbreak. Not because they've chosen a side, but because the suffering is impossible to ignore.
And part of why it feels so heavy is this. We're not just watching the present. We're watching shadows, long shadows stretching across generations. People think this is an ancient fight. It's not. It's a modern story, carved into very old fault lines. And in this episode, our job is simple: to give you a calmer, clearer way to look at Israel and Palestine, using one street, two families, and a few simple tests for language and power, so you don't feel so lost or so scared to speak when it comes back.
You're listening to Curious with AI Together, a show where we ask big, uncomfortable questions and try to think them through without shouting. I'm Eve. With me is my co-host, Lex. Together, we try to make sense of the world one careful conversation at a time. Today's conversation is a heavy one: antisemitism, Israel, Palestine, history, power, and pain. We're not going to do the internet thing. No point scoring, no gotcha moments. Just two people, going slowly, trying to understand why the world keeps returning to this same impossible question. No viral clips, no hot take debate, just one long, careful pass through the story so you can finally follow it without feeling yelled at or tested. Quick guardrail before we go any further. Criticizing policies is not hate. Respect for people is non-negotiable here. If things get confusing, I'll ask Lex to say it again, slowly. We're not here to win a debate. We're here to learn enough to earn an opinion.
I'll keep the map clear. Simple words, real dates, no hot takes, no slurs, no code language. If you've ever thought, I care about this, but I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing, you're in the right place.
When people talk about this conflict, they say it's complicated. But most of the confusion doesn't come from complexity. It comes from continuity. This story never really hit pause. There was no clean break, no moment where the past neatly ended and a fresh chapter began. Decade after decade, the same tensions kept moving forward, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but always moving. It's like watching a river. The surface keeps changing, but the current underneath stays the same.
And that's why the world keeps circling back to it. Not because people enjoy the argument, not because they're experts, not because they want another fight online. It's because this story touches things we all care about: identity, belonging, displacement, survival. When people look at this conflict, they see echoes of their own fears, their own histories, their own families.
And underneath all of that, there's another emotion we almost never name: fear of the future. A quiet fear that the next chapter will be worse, that we're watching something that's building toward a breaking point. This episode won't fix that, but it can give you a clearer map, a short, honest timeline of how we got here, one simple lens for power and fairness, and language that separates people from policies so you can feel less lost and less scared to speak when the headlines come back. So, if you're listening on your commute, or washing dishes, or lying awake at 2 a.m. scrolling the news, our job for the next stretch is simple: to walk you through this conflict slowly enough that you can finally say, okay, I don't know everything, but I get how we got here. And I know how to talk about it without erasing anyone. we're going to define a few charged words that keep blowing up conversations, walk a clear road from then to now, and sit with the human cost without ranking anyone's grief. No loyalty tests, no pressure to pick a team. Just an invitation to stay curious when everything in you wants to shut down, and to come out of this a little less afraid of your own voice.
To do that, we need one more guardrail. Words can hurt even when we don't intend them to. So before we dive into the history, we're going to start with names, not noise. What antisemitism actually means, what it doesn't mean, and how to tell the difference between hating a people and criticizing a policy. If you've ever wondered, am I allowed to say this? Or is it anti-Semitic to feel that? The next few minutes are for you.
Deep breath, let's start there. Then we'll follow the story from the beginning of now. Okay, let's start with a word that shows up everywhere, and almost no one agrees on what it actually means. By the end of this segment, you'll have a 2-question pocket test you can run on any comment, post, or thought, so you're less scared of this word.
Yeah, anti-Semitic. The word that ends half the conversations before they really start.
I've had this experience. Maybe you have too if you're listening. You say something about Israel or about the Jews, and someone fires back, "That's anti-Semitic," and your stomach drops. You think, wait, am I secretly a bigot? I thought I was just talking politics. Or you're on the other side. You hear something that feels ugly and dangerous, but you don't know how to explain why it's a problem without sounding like you're trying to shut down all criticism.
Right. So let's make this really simple. We're not going to do a full university course on anti-Semitism. We're going to build one small tool you can carry into any conversation, online or in real life, so you feel a little less scared of this word.
At its core, anti-Semitism is hostility, hatred, or prejudice toward Jews as Jews. You can shrink that down to, am I angry at a government, or am I blaming Jews as a people? Not toward a government, not toward a set of policies, toward Jews as a people, their identity, their religion, their existence.
So if I say, I think this specific Israeli policy is wrong, that might be unfair, it might be misinformed, but on its own, that's not automatically anti-Semitism.
Exactly. Criticizing a government, even harshly, is politics. It becomes anti-Semitism when you blame Jews as a group for something, or you say or imply that Jews are secretly running the world, or you suggest that the problem with Jews is that they exist as Jews at all.
So it's about who you're talking about and how you're talking about them, not just whether the word Israel is in the sentence.
Yes, and we can make it even more practical. Here's a little pocket test you can silently run on any comment, post, or thought. If you want, grab one example from your own feed in your head right now and run it through this with us. Question 1. Am I talking about a government or policy or about Jews as a people? Question 2. If I swapped Jews with some other group, would this sound like classic bigotry? If the answer is, I'm blaming Jews as a group, and yeah, this would sound ugly if I said it about any other minority, that's a big red flag. You're in or very close to anti-Semitic territory.
Can we walk that through a real example? Because I can hear someone thinking, okay, but what does that actually sound like?
Sure. Imagine you're in a group chat and someone posts, well, of course there's war. The Jews run the banks and the media. They profit from chaos.
Oof.
Run the pocket test. Are we talking about a government? No. Are we talking about a policy? No. We're talking about the Jews as a group and saying they secretly control money and media and like war because it helps them. That's not harsh criticism of Israel. That's classic anti-Semitic conspiracy language. You could swap Jews with almost any minority, and it would still be vile.
And for someone Jewish reading that, it doesn't land like a policy argument. It lands like, you're the problem. You're secretly dangerous because of who you are.
Okay, can I admit something slightly ridiculous here?
Please.
For way too long, I kept hearing people say anti-Semitic, and in my head, I heard anti-semantic, like people who hate grammar, or anti-symmetric, people who are mad at geometry.
We have to protect the triangles.
Exactly. So if you're listening and you've secretly muddled that word or felt too embarrassed to ask, you're not dumb. You're just human. The word is clunky, the history behind it is heavy. We're all catching up.
And that's why this distinction matters so much when we talk about Israel and Palestine. Because two things are true at once. One, Jews have been targeted, demonized, and killed for being Jews for a very long time. Two, governments that claim to represent Jews can still make unjust decisions that deserve criticism, sometimes very sharp criticism.
So if you're someone who feels deep anger about what Israel is doing, you're allowed to feel that. You're allowed to say that. This tool isn't here to shut you up. It's here to help you aim the anger at policies and power, not at your Jewish neighbor, your Jewish coworker, or some imaginary global Jew pulling all the strings.
And we're going to extend the same care to another pattern in this story. The ways Palestinians and Arabs have been dehumanized, silenced, and treated as if their lives are worth less. If you stay with us, we'll come back to that. But first, now that we've put one noisy word on the table and made it a little clearer, we can finally start the thing everyone's been asking for, a short, honest walk from then to now.
The beginning of now. Let's go there. Okay, to find the beginning of now, we don't go back thousands of years. We go back about a century. If your brain usually checks out when you hear the word history, stay with this one. We'll keep it short, human, and tied to the headlines you've been seeing now. Picture a strip of land along the eastern Mediterranean. Olive trees, stone houses, markets, people praying in different languages. For centuries, this place is ruled by an empire based in Istanbul, the Ottoman Empire. Most people there are Arabic-speaking Muslims and Christians. Small Jewish communities live there too, alongside them, and many more Jews live scattered across Europe and the Middle East. If you walked down a street in 1900, you'd see neighbors who've known each other for generations. Nobody calls it Israel-Palestine yet. It's just home.
Let's stay on that street for a second. In one house, you've got a Palestinian family, Arabic-speaking, mostly Muslim or Christian, grandparents buried on a hillside nearby, olive trees they've harvested for longer than anyone remembers. Across the lane, you might have a small Jewish family, part of an old community that's been in that land for a very long time too, praying in Hebrew, speaking Arabic with their neighbors, sending their kids to play in the same dusty alley. No one is thinking, soon the whole world will be fighting about our street. They're thinking, will the harvest be good this year? Will my child grow up safe?
That's important. Before this became a global symbol, it was just a place with ordinary people trying to live ordinary lives. Keep those two households in your mind, the Palestinian family and the Jewish family on the same street. We're going to keep coming back to them whenever the map zooms out and your brain starts to blur. Then the world tilts. World War I shatters the Ottoman Empire. Suddenly, the people on that street wake up under new rulers, the British, who start calling the area Palestine. And far away, in European cities and conference rooms, politicians begin drawing maps of lands they've never lived in. At the same time, something powerful is growing in the Jewish world, a modern political movement called Zionism, the idea that Jews, after centuries of persecution and expulsion, should have a homeland, a place where they can be safe and self-governing. Some Zionists look at that same strip of land and say, that's where our story began. We should build our future there.
So now we have a dangerous overlap. People already living on the land who see it as their home and their future, and a growing movement of another people who see the same land as their hoped-for refuge after centuries of being hunted.
Exactly. And the new imperial powers, instead of clearly choosing a path and making it fair, send mixed signals, make overlapping promises, and leave everyone thinking history is about to move in my favor. While all of that is brewing, another horror is building in Europe. Decades of antisemitism, laws, pogroms, expulsions eventually explode into something almost beyond words. The Holocaust, 6 million Jews murdered, along with millions of others, in camps and mass shootings and ghettos. Entire families erased, whole communities wiped off the map. After that, for many Jews who survive, the idea of we need a place of our own where we can defend ourselves goes from theory to emergency.
So when they look at that same strip of land, the one with our two families on the street, they're not just seeing history. They're seeing escape, a last chance to never be that vulnerable again.
Right. And at the same time, for the Palestinian family on that street, something else is happening. They're hearing rumors. More and more Jewish immigrants arriving, land being bought, new neighborhoods going up. Some Palestinians sell land, some welcome new neighbors. Others feel a rising fear. If more and more people come, what happens to us? Do we get pushed out of our own home? Now you have two deep traumas, centuries of antisemitism and a looming fear of displacement, both staring at the same small piece of land. And the world, instead of calmly diffusing that situation, essentially drops a match.
After World War II, global powers back a plan to partition the land, to split it into a Jewish state and an Arab state with a special status for a shared city in the middle. Many Jewish leaders, desperate for a safe home after the Holocaust, say yes, even to a map that isn't ideal. Most Palestinian leaders and surrounding Arab states say no, arguing that it's unfair to carve up their home to solve a crime committed in Europe. When the plan moves forward anyway, and the British prepare to leave, Jewish leaders declare a new state, called Israel, in 1948. For many Jews, it feels like finally having a home that can defend them. Within days, neighboring Arab armies move in, militias on all sides start to fight, and the first Arab-Israeli war erupts.
By the time the guns fall mostly silent, that street looks different. In many places, the Palestinian family is gone, fleeing fighting, forced out, or too scared to return. Their house might now be occupied by a Jewish family who themselves just lost everything in Europe, or in another Arab country that pushed them out. Two histories of fear and loss now stacked on the same front door. And that's one reason this story feels like a wound that never closed. For many Jews, that war feels like survival. Finally, a state that exists because they exist. For many Palestinians, that same war feels like catastrophe, what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe, the mass displacement of their people from their homes. Both of those feelings are real.
In the next stretch, we're going to zoom in on what happened after that, when one side ended up with a state, the other didn't, and a lot of people found themselves living under someone else's control. That's where words like occupation and settlements start to touch daily life, and where this century that wouldn't end moves closer to the headlines you see today.
If you've ever read two headlines about this place and felt like they were describing different planets, you're not crazy. A lot of people are living in completely different realities on the same small map. In this stretch, we're going to spend a few minutes inside two ordinary Tuesdays on the same piece of land. If you only remember one part of this episode, let it be this: two normal days that show you what all the headlines are really doing to people. Let's go back to our street.
Picture the Palestinian family a generation later. Same region. But for many Palestinians, especially in the West Bank and Gaza, there's a simple fact shaping every day. They don't fully control their own borders, their own airspace, or even sometimes whether they can move freely from one town to the next.
Let's make that concrete. What does that look like on a Tuesday morning?
Okay, it's early. The oldest son has a job in a nearby city. He leaves extra time because there's a checkpoint on the road out of town. Some days he's waved through. Some days the line barely moves. Some days the soldiers are tense and nobody explains why. If he misses too many shifts, he loses the job. You don't have to know every legal term to feel what that does to a family's stress level. His mother wants to build an extra room on the house. On paper, she needs a permit. In practice, those permits are hard to get for Palestinians in certain areas. Maybe she builds anyway because the family is growing. Years later, a crew and a jeep show up. The structure is declared illegal. There's a demolition order. The house she saved for, the room she planned, suddenly feels like it's resting on paperwork she never controlled.
So it's not just about bullets and bombs. It's, can I get to work? Can I visit my cousin? Can I build on my own land without wondering if a bulldozer will show up one day?
Exactly.
For many Palestinians, occupation isn't just a legal word. It's the sense that someone else's army and someone else's rules can reach into your day at almost any moment.
Now let's cross the street. What does it Tuesday feel like for an Israeli family living inside Israel or near the border with Gaza?
Different kind of fear. Imagine a family in a town within rocket range. They know where the nearest bomb shelter is. The kids have practiced what to do when the siren sounds. They know how many seconds they have to get from their bed to a safer place. One evening, they're eating dinner. A siren wails. The parents' bodies move before their brains can catch up, grabbing the smallest kid, shouting for the others, hustling everyone into a reinforced room or down a set of stairs. Maybe nothing hits nearby. Maybe somewhere else, someone isn't that lucky. Either way, the kids learn early, the sky can change from normal to terrifying in a few seconds.
So for them, phrases like security and self-defense aren't talking points. They're, will the bus my kid takes be targeted? Will a rocket land near our town? Will my teenager come home from a nightclub if someone decides to blow themselves up in one?
Right. For many Israeli Jews, especially those whose families survived past attacks or wars, there's a deep, understandable fear of being surrounded, outnumbered, and attacked again. That fear doesn't excuse everything, but it is real.
If you're listening right now, notice which family your heart leaned toward more in the last few minutes. The one waiting at checkpoints and watching bulldozers, or the one racing to shelters and counting seconds between siren and impact. Whichever it is, that doesn't make you a monster or a hero. It just shows where your own story, your community, your news diet connects first.
And here's the hard part. Both of those fears are true, but they're not equal, and they're not evenly distributed. One side lives with much more structural power, an army, control over borders, over airspace, over permits and movement. The other side often lives under that power, without a real state of their own.
That's why some people use words like occupation, apartheid, or oppression to describe what Palestinians face, and why others react so strongly, hearing those words as an attack on Israel's right to exist or defend itself.
In the next part, we're not going to solve that argument, but we are going to give you a better way to think about it. Not with 5 abstract tests, but with one simple lens. Who has the power to change the other side's life on an ordinary day? If you stay with us, we'll use that lens to look at this map again and to ask one question that can quietly rewire how you read almost every headline about this place. On this ordinary day, who actually has options?
Okay, let's put some shape around that word unequal. We're not going to settle every argument about apartheid, oppression, or self-defense, but we are going to use one simple lens. Call it the ordinary day power test.
Right. The question you asked earlier, who has the power to change the other side's life on an ordinary day? Exactly. Not who is more lovable, not who has suffered more, but very practically, on a random Tuesday, who has more levers over the other side's daily reality?
Let's go back to our 2 families on that street. For the Palestinian family, a lot of the big levers sit in someone else's hands. Whether there's a checkpoint on the road to work, whether their neighborhood is classified in a way that makes building almost impossible, whether their town is sealed off for a security operation. Those decisions are made by a state and an army they don't control. If you picture our street again, it's like discovering that most of the light switches, locks, and road signs are wired to one house's fuse box, not the other's. For the Israeli family, many of those levers belong to institutions that do claim to represent them. Their government decides where the army goes, what gets bombed, what gets built, who can cross which border. That doesn't mean every Israeli agrees with those choices, but as a group, Israeli Jews live inside the system that's holding most of the official power.
Okay, but I can hear someone pushing back already. If Israelis are so powerful, why do they still feel so scared? Why the sirens, the rockets, the bomb shelters? Because that fear is real too.
Yeah, this is where it gets uncomfortable. You can have a situation where one side clearly has more structural power, the state, the army, the borders, the airspace, and at the same time, the other side can still hurt them badly in moments. Think of militant groups firing rockets or sending gunmen to attack civilians. That doesn't flip the whole power structure, but it does mean ordinary Israelis live with a real, traumatic kind of vulnerability. You can't power your way out of a rocket aimed at your bus stop.
So the lens isn't saying Israelis feel nothing and Palestinians feel everything. It's saying even when both families are scared, one lives inside the system that decides where the checkpoints and airstrikes go, and the other mostly lives underneath that system.
Yes, that's exactly the shape of it. Okay, but can I push you on something? Because I can hear another voice in my head saying, so you're just calling one side the oppressor and the other the victim, full stop?
I'm not handing out permanent halos or horns. This lens doesn't tell you who is good and who is evil. People on all sides make moral choices, some brave, some horrifying. What the lens does say is, when we talk about fairness, we can't pretend everyone has the same ability to shape the other side's life. Power doesn't decide who deserves empathy, but it hugely affects who gets to decide what happens next.
So here's how you can use it without getting lost in every slogan. Next time you see a headline or a hashtag about this conflict, pause and quietly ask, in this situation, who actually has options? Who can choose to ease the pressure or dial it up? If you're looking at a clip of a house being demolished, that might sound like, who signed the order and who had no real say? If you're looking at a rocket strike, it might be, who chose the target and who just happened to live there?
In the next stretch, we're going to slow down with a few of those charged words, not to police your language, but to ask, what are we really saying about human lives when we use them? If you're still with us, take a breath, maybe unclench your jaw a little, then we'll walk into the language minefield with this power lens in hand, so you can decide, more consciously, which words you're willing to carry.
Okay, let's talk about the words that make people freeze. The words that can end a friendship, end a comment thread, and your willingness to speak at all. If you've ever sat staring at a post or a message thinking, if I use this word, am I being honest or am I being hateful? The next few minutes are for you. What we're aiming for here is simple, that you walk away with a few words feeling a little less radioactive, so you're less likely to either explode or go silent.
We're not going to cover every charged word out there, but we are going to slow down with a few of the big labels people fight over. The ones used for attacks on civilians, the ones used for armed groups who say they're fighting back, and the ones people use when they believe a population is facing existential danger. Not to give you a perfect dictionary, but to ask, what happens to real people when we use these words this way?
Let's start with the one that makes my stomach tense, terrorist. Because I've seen it used to describe anyone who throws a stone or shouts the wrong slogan, and I've also seen people refuse to use it even when civilians are clearly being targeted on purpose.
Yeah, at its simplest, terrorism usually means violence against civilians on purpose to send a message or scare a population. By that meaning, there have absolutely been attacks in this conflict that fit the word terrorist. Gunmen shooting families at a bus stop, bombs in markets, rockets fired at cities with no way to aim only at soldiers.
So the question isn't, does terrorism exist here? It's, who do we choose to call terrorist and who do we never use that word for?
Exactly. When a militant group fires a rocket at a town, a lot of people have no problem using the word terrorist. But when a state drops a bomb on a crowded apartment block, knowing civilians will die, people reach for different language. Strike, operation, unfortunate collateral damage.
Same fear, same shattered bodies, very different vocabulary. If you only ever call one side's violence terror and the other side's violence regrettable, you're not describing morality anymore, you're just describing who holds the microphone.
That's where our power lens can help. If only the weaker side ever gets called terrorist, and the stronger side never has its violence named that way, Our language might be describing power, not just morality.
So maybe a healthier move isn't to throw terrorist at everyone, but to be honest about what is being done and to whom, no matter who's doing it.
And to remember that our two families on that street don't stop hurting just because the person who killed their child was wearing a uniform or a mask.
Okay, take a breath with me for this next one, because it's big. Genocide. I see people throw it into captions and comments like a grenade. Other people shut down completely the moment they hear it, as if the conversation just hit a legal landmine.
The legal definition is very specific. Lawyers and courts can spend years arguing over every word. But when most people online say genocide, they usually mean, I think one group is being killed on such a scale and in such a targeted way that their existence is at risk.
For people whose families lived through the Holocaust, that word is sacred. It's a warning flare against mass murder. For people watching whole neighborhoods reduced to rubble, children dying in huge numbers, it can feel like the only word big enough for the horror.
And that's the clash. One side hears, you're Nazis now. The other hears, are you even seeing what's happening to us?
So what do we do with that without playing court?
One option is to be very sparing with the word, unless we're willing to do the hard work of studying it. Another, if you're not sure, is to describe what you know more concretely. This many people killed, this many children, this level of destruction. And to say, whatever the legal term, this is morally unbearable. That way, you're naming the harm without pretending to be a tribunal.
So here's a little practice you can try the next time you're about to post or argue or hit share. Before you drop a charged word, whether it's used to describe violence against civilians, or used to describe armed groups, or used to describe fear of existential harm, pause for just a breath and ask, if one of the families on that street heard me say this, which one would I be erasing? If you can't answer or you feel that twist in your gut, that's a sign to slow down.
And if this conversation is already helping you slow down and notice your own language a little more, you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there who are tired of being either angry all the time or silent all the time.
If you're one of them and this is helping, tap like or leave a simple listening in the comments, not as a team flag, but as a little signal for others who are trying to stay human in the middle of this.
Because the question under all of this is, if the story feels this bad, this stuck, this unequal, what would it even mean for things to be better? Not perfect, not pain-free, just better than the loop we're in now.
In our last stretch, we're going to sit with that question. What would better realistically look like? And what tiny role do ordinary people like us play in getting there? If you're still here and your brain isn't mush, take one more deep breath. We'll land this together. Okay, we've walked through history, fear, power, language. If you're still here, you might be thinking the same thing I am. Does this story even have a better future, or is it just endless reruns of the same pain? And if you are still here, you've already done something most people never do with this story. You stayed past the first spike of outrage, into the part where things get uncomfortable and complicated.
Yeah. I think a lot of people carry a quiet belief that this conflict is cursed, that it only knows how to get worse.
So let's be really clear about what we're not going to do right now. We're not unveiling a secret peace plan. We're not pretending there's a magic sentence that will make everyone link arms and sing in two languages.
What we can do is much smaller and more honest. To ask, on that one street with our two families, what would it mean for things to be a little less bad than they are now? Because better almost always starts as less unbearable for real people.
So let's go back to that street, the Palestinian family on one side, the Israeli family on the other. What would better look like there?
For the Palestinian family, better might start with this: being able to travel to work or school without wondering if a checkpoint will wreck the day. Being able to build on their own land under clear rules that apply the same to everyone, not rules that change depending on whose name is on the ID card. Knowing that if a soldier or a settler harms them, there is a real chance someone with power will be held accountable. For the Israeli family, better might start with this: Their kids not needing to know how many seconds they have to reach a shelter. Going weeks, then months without a siren ripping through dinner. Knowing that their state's safety doesn't depend on millions of people nearby living with no real horizon except more rage and more despair.
So, better isn't some abstract slogan. It's what our ordinary day power test starts to look like when it shifts. Fewer levers in one house, more shared control over what happens on that street. It's less fear on both sides of the street, more symmetry in whose life counts, more of the rules being written with everyone in mind, not just one people and their nightmares. But if I'm listening in my car or on a walk, I might still be thinking, okay, but I don't run a government. I don't command an army. What am I supposed to do with any of this?
That's a fair question. Most of us won't be in the room where borders or ceasefires are negotiated. We won't sign treaties. We won't decide where the next checkpoint goes or which neighborhood gets bombed. But we do shape the little information climate around us. We decide whose pain we treat as real. We decide whose humanity we refuse to erase. We decide how fast we reach for words that shut thinking down instead of opening it up.
We decide whether we talk about people in this story like they're chess pieces or talk about them like they are someone else's beloved child.
We decide whether our fear makes us smaller, crueler, or a tiny bit more careful.
So maybe better for people like us starts with small, repeatable things, like this. Before you share a clip that confirms your worst story about the other side, ask, is this helping me see more clearly or just feel more righteous? When you hear someone erase all Jewish fear or all Palestinian grief, gently say, hey, I think their pain is real too. When you feel completely overwhelmed, instead of doom scrolling till 2 a.m., maybe listen to one story from a person you're not used to rooting for.
None of that solves the conflict, but it does something important. It makes you just a bit harder to recruit into dehumanizing anyone. And the more of us who are hard to recruit into that, the harder it is for anyone to wage war in our name without resistance.
If you made it this far, you've just spent about half an hour staying with a story that most people touch for 10 seconds and then run from. If you feel both more clear and more sad, you're not broken. That's what honest clarity about suffering often feels like.
You don't have to pick a perfect slogan when this conflict comes back to your feed. You don't have to shout over people who know more or less than you do. You can start with just a few truths. Two peoples deeply attached to the same land. A lot of power sitting on one side of the line. Real fear and real grief in more than one direction. And words that can either numb us to that or keep us awake to it.
If this conversation gave you even one useful tool or one sentence you want to carry into your next debate, tell us in the comments. What's one question you're still holding or one sentence you'd want both families on that street to hear so that someone else scrolling through later can borrow it when they're stuck? Not to win, not to prove you're on the right side, just to stay human in a story that keeps trying to turn everyone into symbols.
And if you want to keep building better questions, not just louder answers, you can subscribe or follow to keep walking through these conversations with us. Conversations about how to face hard questions with clarity, calm, and care for the people involved.
For now, take care of your brain, take care of your heart, and remember, clarity isn't the end of compassion. Most of the time, on ordinary days, it's the beginning. Thanks for listening.